Welcome to Going In Blind. I'm your host, Zach Tidwell, and my guest this week is Mr. Laszlo Suhayda, who in 1956, at the age of 5 years old, had to escape a communist, Soviet occupied Hungary with his family as the Soviet regime was persecuting Catholics in the region in an attempt to erase any sort of conflicting power bases within their borders. And I'm sure we're going to get into that and so much more today. But before we do, just a couple quick announcements as usual. If you've been listening for a while, you know that there's a powerful story behind this podcast and in helping try and share stories like these. But if you're new to the show, head over to zachtidwell.com and you can read a little bit about what I'm talking about there. And also join my mailing list to get some announcements and deals on some two big projects that I have going on behind the scenes right now, but I don't want to waste any more time. So Laszlo, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us, Tidwell.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong here. I was trying to figure out the appropriate place to start, but it seems like setting the stage for what occurred back in 1956 would maybe.
Well, actually, I'm going to set the stage at the end of World War II, when the Allies had a Potsdam Agreement on August 1st, 1945, and everyone signed, the Allies signed it, and Russia violated that agreement and started to occupy the Eastern Bloc European countries. Hungary was one of the first ones that they occupied. And so they basically had a premier leader not appointed. He was placed as the premier leader in Hungary. His name was Matyas Rákosi, and he listened to the orders from the Kremlin. And basically the Kremlin, which at the time was Joseph Stalin, would relay the 5-year plan and all the different things that the Hungarian regime would do for Russia. And those orders came through Yuri Andropov, who was the Russian ambassador to Russia. So he was the conduit where he would receive the information and pass it on to the Rákosi regime. And so as this was going on, they did have a free multi-party election in 1945, and the Democracy Party had won by 57% of the vote. Communist Party received 17. Of course, Russia, Joseph Stalin didn't like that, so they said there were tampering of voting going on, so they dismissed it and had a re-election where they in turn tampered with the voters' box and ushered in socialism and communism. And in 1948, under Joseph Stalin's orders, Rákosi had placed a AVH secret police in place, equivalent to the KGB. But their whole purpose was to bring fear to the country, because in 1945, when they occupied, they established a 22% GNP tax on Hungary. So that plummeted a lot of people into poverty situation. So how do you control an impoverished nation? It's by force, or it's by persecution, and or in this case, the AVH was the secret police for the Russian occupation. So with all of that examples, what did they do as they were controlling the country?
Can we pause here for a second?
Sure.
Okay. Because I was going to ask you to lay out some of the Potsdam Agreement in setting the stage for 1956. Honestly, I had heard of it. I didn't know what it was until I was preparing for this episode. So just to give people a little bit of an overview, I mean, this is all post the Nazis have surrendered. This is all basically the plan by the Allied forces to come to an agreement on reparations, how people are going to be prosecuted, and how this territory is going to be divvied up, right? And then the Soviets shortly after that violated this agreement when they invaded Manchuria, which was just before the Japanese surrendered, right? And then correct me if I'm wrong on any of that. And then also, how does that violation of that lead to all of the things that you just started to lay out?
Well, the whole premise behind the Russian idea of occupation was to rob natural resources out of the occupied countries and to build up the Russian Empire, in which they succeeded. And that's how the Soviet Union became, uh, you know, the power to be.
Okay.
So, so that in that situation, they had to control the population because they did not want any uprising, even though the chances are if there's an impoverished country and people are poor and they're trying to make ends meet, there's going to be a point where they're going to revolt. So that's where Joseph Stalin said that there has to be a secret police that will do control of the population through whatever means possible. So, as an example, in my book 12 Bells to Freedom, there are some college students, for example, that would be walking down the street, and if there were four of them, they would consider that a group. So you'd have this black limousine, which was the AVH limousine, stop and arrest them. So they would arrest them and claim that they are uh, violating the communist accords, and they're actually enemies of the Communist Party. And they would take them to Andrassy Street. That's where the AVH building, police building, was located. And then they would interrogate them in the basement and basically order them to sign a confession. They didn't have to be right. All they're looking to do is make an example out of these unfortunate, innocent people. And then they could say that, yeah, we did this, we found this out, and here's a threat that everybody should witness. So the kids that would basically sign the confessions were indoctrinated into a brainwashing system. And those that did not, because they realized, no, I didn't do anything, so they claimed their innocence, they would be tortured. And if they still didn't, then they had a room in the back of the basement where they would hang these innocent folks. So that's the regime that basically the backdrop of my parents. And my parents met during the end of World War II. And in the book, there's a romance type situation, which was interesting. Everyone had to be chaperoned. So I think the readers will get a nice kick out of how that process went forward.
All right.
And then at the end of the war, my mom was very lucky because as the Hungarians first were allied with Germany by force, but my father was in the ME 109 program, which is the Messerschmitt type aircraft. So he was a student pilot there, and he met my mother, who was the um, post office manager at Bergen, just outside of Székesfehérvár, and that's where they met. And basically, as I said, at the end of the war, the squadron decided to surrender to the U.S. troops. They didn't want to surrender to the Russian troops. So there was a chase. The Russian army was chasing the squadron all the way through Austria into Germany. So that was quite tense. And
This was your
so
dad's squadron.
that was my dad's squadron. And basically, what happened after that was uh, she was not supposed to go because they were engaged, and only married couples were allowed to go on that journey. So, but being real good friends with the captain was real good friends with my father, so he made an exception. So she went with the squadron. They were married in Poking, Germany, and were prisoners of war for a period of time. And then basically the end of the war came, and then they had an option. We could have gone to the United States, or my parents could have gone to the United States at the end of the war, but all the relatives lived in Hungary. So they decided to go back to Hungary, unknowing that the Russians were going to occupy Hungary. So that's how they ended up back there. And he was blacklisted, so he could not get jobs.
Was
But
he a German citizen?
no, he was Hungarian.
He was Hungarian. Okay. And he was still in his training. He never ended up having to fight in the war.
No, he never fought in the war, but he did do reconnaissance.
Okay.
So
Wow.
reconnaissance was what he was doing, but it didn't matter. He was still blacklisted. So, but he got jobs, different jobs here and there. His father had um, a, agricultural type farming um, work that he did. So he was like a mechanic for him. So he did that for a while, and then he had an opportunity to join a aircraft club, an air club, and so he taught young Hungarians how to fly. So with that opportunity, he had credentials for in case the government needed a experienced person. And sure enough, in 1959, uh, sorry, 1949. What am I saying? 1949, they needed an aircraft air manager for the airport at Pécs, Hungary. So he got that position. So for 3 years, everything was nice job. Under communism, you're placed in a housing facility. So if you're placed in a housing facility, then basically you're covered with home and also profession. They tell you where you're going to work. So everything is run by the Communist Party as to who does what, and if there's an issue, then it could be bad. You might be an aircraft professional, but you might be working in a coal mine. So there's some ramifications to that, and so yeah, he did confront a situation where my older brother Josef was on a bus. They had an airport bus, and they would pick up passengers and drop them off in different parts of the Pécs location. And the driver liked to drink, so he would stop at these wineries before dropping off the bus, and that caused an issue. And prior to that, my dad had received a broken leg through a motorcycle accident. So there was a substitute that came in as an assistant, and he wrote that bus driver up, and the bus driver thought my father had written him up. So now he had sent letters to the Budapest headquarters stating that my father was using fuel and the bus for personal reasons, personal purposes. So they brought him up on charges. So
And this is
again,
all.
this is all in the book.
But yeah, I'm asked. This is all under this. You said that it's the ADH was the secret, like the secret police were installed at this time and operating as
Exactly.
these false accusations are made.
Yeah, it's the AV Victor H.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
So yeah, that situation is quite interesting, because what I haven't reported yet is my uncle, who is also a Hungarian pilot, was shot down in a prison camp. And after the war, they said they were going to be deporting all prisoners to Siberia. And he was adamant he wasn't going to go. So he ended up eating tobacco, and it destroyed his liver and you name it. So he passed away. And for that purpose, my father never wanted to join the Communist Party, Red Book. So when they would ask him to join, he'd always say his workload was such where he doesn't have time. And so that was primarily the big tipping point in the trial. And so the union, it was interesting. The union manager in that region kind of advised my father to get a Russian attorney. And same scenario, my father didn't want a Russian attorney, he wanted a Hungarian attorney. But he explained, he said, well, he knows all of what the uh, prosecution is going to bring, and he'll be able to, work it out. So he'll know the proper preparation and the solution to it. So he finally agreed. And sure enough, it was I don't want to spoil it for the readers, but it was a quite interesting trial. So, but after that, he was reassigned, from that airport manager job to a forestry position. So same thing. He basically hauled timber and whatnot from in a truck into different parts of Hungary. So there was an issue there too with one late truck that came in late, and it was in the middle of winter, and basically the truck engine block with the water had expanded and cracked the block, and he was assigned to basically get all the water out of the trucks as they arrived, so they wouldn't have an issue like that. But that particular driver went in the back of the building instead of the front, so he didn't even know he was there. So that kind of led to another reassignment, which he was in a coal mine. So in the coal mine, obviously you work
It's like
underground,
camp,
and
essentially.
it's one of those deals. So, and all this time, just for the readers, over 100,000 innocent Hungarians were executed under communism. And when they first occupied Hungary, 800,000, and we're talking about politicians, community leaders, teachers, um, a whole list of professional people were arrested and sent to different parts of Russia. So this is the process that takes place under a socialist communist regime. And also, for example, when they first came in, and this happened to a very large executive, a CEO, and he had a pottery plant, very prestigious plant, and they took it over. They said, "Okay, now the Communist Party owns your plant." And it's called Zsolnai is the name of the plant. And he advised his family to leave Hungary, but he was going to stay and fight for his plant because his father and his father before him, all of these, this Zsolnai plant basically was developed in the 1700s. So he wanted to fight for it.
Yeah.
And they ended up executing him. So if you own a house, for example, if you have your house, we'll put it in today's perspective. If you own a house and you're living under socialism, they could come in and say, okay, now you don't own your house anymore. The state owns your house. And then they could put one or two families along with your family in the house. And guess what? You also pay rent on something you already owned. So this is the type of persecution that the people had. And basically in 1956, all the students were aware of all this. And the engineering students in Budapest University came up with 16 points. And the 16 points basically outlined all of the atrocities that they had done since they occupied Hungary. So that was released and the blue collar workers all rallied behind it and agreed to what was stated and demonstrated. So that's how the revolution started. But
Let's pause
before,
here for a second.
yeah,
I just otherwise, if I don't ask now, I'm gonna forget. Well,
that's
it's gonna, or I'll be not paying attention fully because I want to ask this question. This came up as soon as we were talking about your dad early on, but specifically his time in the German military. Did you ever get to, I guess on one hand, was he conscripted or did he willingly join? And did you ever get to have a conversation with him about that later in life?
yeah, basically, when he first started out, he was a mechanic, an aircraft mechanic. So after a period of time, he was always interested in flying. So he actually went into his commanding officer's office and stated that he wanted to fly. And after a couple of different um, meetings and people that the advice went to them, they decided to allow him to fly. So he had learned his flying on. You've probably seen these or know these photos of the biplanes, and that's what he learned in the biplane. And so he had a dramatic moment that actually, when he resolved it, was promoted to the ME 109 as a student pilot. And what happened was there's an Italian aircraft that it was half wood and half metal. So he was taking his final exams in that aircraft along with others. And the pilot before him, you have certain maneuvers that you had to go and do a different angles, turning angles and steep climbs and drops and basically the steep climb meant you went until the airplane stalled, and then it goes into a spin. And so there's a method of correcting that spin and pulling out of it. So that had to be done, and that other pilot did all that, and he still crashed. So the next day, they halted everything, and the next day, my father had to repeat exactly what the other pilot did. And he did, and he got into the spin, and he was doing the corrections, and he couldn't get that out of that spin. So what he did is he gunned the engine full speed. So he was at a height where he could do that, and as he increased the speed, he leveled out the aircraft and pulled back and and basically shaved the weeds on the field as he pulled back out and got out of it. So
The rest of that.
yeah, and all the family was watching this, so you can imagine the real concern. So in the debrief, they found out that the metal in the wood did not work, and it caused airflow that adjusted the plane in a different manner than it was engineered to do, which was the cause of those crashes. So my father was pointed out as the person that corrected that problem.
Just barely. Yeah. But what I was asking about the conscription was he conscripted into the military is what I'm asking. Or like that, this is, I don't know when he joined. I'm either.
He
What?
he volunteered. He
Okay.
volunteered to go in. Yeah.
Yeah. And was that while the war was going on already? Like the Nazi party was in power and he went in?
Well, the war started in, I guess, 1939 when they invaded Poland. There's probably dates before that as well that prepped the invasion, but that's about the time when he enlisted. So it wasn't. Uh, Hungary was not allied with Germany at the time when he enlisted.
Okay, so
So
he enlisted into the Hungarian military and then they
Hungarian,
absorbed.
right? Hungarian Army Air Corps is where he went into.
Jeez, man. That is just a wild. I mean, you go in trying to serve your country and you get pulled into that craziness.
Yeah. Right.
Gosh. Okay. And sorry, I had to ask that. I was greatly
But
curious.
there's another angle, backdrop, if you will, about religion. Now, when the Russians occupied Hungary, they tried to break the religion faith ties, and how they were trying to do that was to arrest Cardinal Mindszenty. Now, Cardinal Mindszenty was the cardinal that he actually fought for all religions, not just Catholic. He fought for all the religions, and because his philosophy and obviously religion defined religion as faith. So if everybody has faith and you're treating your neighbor as you would treat your family or yourself, that's a cohesive system. And so when you're allied together, you're going to be a good neighbor, a good father, a good brother, all of that. But if you fractionate it and you get neighbor against neighbor, that's when you can control the population, because then the neighbor will accuse you of something and it doesn't have to be true, as we've discovered with some of the information I presented. And then they can be hauled off. And this happened to a man who had a pig farm. And he invited all of his neighbors and relatives. In the fall, they have a festival where they would slaughter a pig and then they would basically have their meat for the winter time. So it was something that he did. And one neighbor declined to attend. But as he saw how much of a good time they were having, he got irritated and turned him in. And sure enough, at 2 a.m. in the morning, the AVH showed up, arrested him, but they didn't take him to the headquarters. They took him down to the village square and hung him as an enemy of the Communist Party. Because the accusation was he was using government pigs. Now, a farmer, for example, would have 90% of his pigs or crop going to the Communist Party, and the balance would be, for him to sustain his family and life.
Mhm.
And in this case, it was one of his pigs, not the communist pig. But the accusations uh, were such that that's what the AVH was looking for, as to set an example, and they didn't have to be right or wrong. They just want to bring fear to the country.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure, when you start turning neighbor on neighbor like that and people start, I would imagine even some of that stuff becomes preemptive, trying to cover your own back, like where these people are starting to accuse their neighbors of doing things so that they stay in the good graces of the regime. And okay, well, maybe they know something that I did, so now I'm going to rat on them, even when, just all of this on top of all the falsities that you've already covered. And it's so terrifying. That's like in the UK, they are enacting the digital IDs, and like you can see where this is greatly a slippery slope, and that technology, I think, would the level of technology that we have today, if things continue on that train and the wrong people get in power of these different structures, that it could be more oppressive than it ever has been.
What's alarming to me is we saw accusational um, propaganda, I'm going to call it,
Mhm.
here in the U.S., where accusations are made and people are believing accusations, and realistically, it could have been devastating to the entire country. So it's always good to prove that an accusation is false. And I think President Trump is an example where he was persecuted for 10 years over Russia, Russia, Russia. And then you find out after the fact that Russia, Russia, Russia was invented. It was never true. And so, there are consequences to following propaganda. For example, in our case, when my family decided to escape, we did not listen to Hungarian news propaganda. We listened to Radio Free Europe. And Radio Free Europe told about the events at the border. So my father had a plan to follow what Radio Free Europe was reporting, but even that plan required additional help. And we had 7 people, strangers, that helped us. Each one did a little bit, but if you added all their bits together, it gave us freedom. So
I'm gonna hang back here on what you just said, and then we'll come back to that.
sure.
Oh, yes, the Russiagate stuff has been proven to be false. I think a large part of what allowed all of that to go on for so long is that the media largely, the media is controlled by a lot of money, and people can push those narratives. And I mean, it has been proven that those were just narratives. As you've already said, it was proven false that this was not a thing. But, we saw this during, or I guess post COVID, we had different tech founders like Mark Zuckerberg talking about American, I can't remember if it was the CIA or the FBI coming in and dictating the kind of things that they censored on those platforms. We already see some companies censoring different types of speech, even though we live in a country with free speech. And I think, again, you start, that was almost like a proxy state involvement into these different corporations. And again, it's like because it sounds so far-fetched when you think back to the 1940s and the 1950s and Hungary being occupied and these things happening. It sounds cartoonish. You read a lot of books, even in sci-fi books, like these same trends are, kind of used as a structure for stories written way, way off into the future and in a fantastic way. But like these are still very real threats in general, that like these things, if there's not accountability to those in power, and the checks and balances aren't allowed to play out in our institutions like they are supposed to, then like this can happen today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then, for example, when I go on my book tours, I've spoken at the University of Missouri St. Louis History Department, and all those students were really captivated by the story of 12 Bells to Freedom. And they actually, at the end, they came up, shook my hand, and was happy to have heard all of what I'm kind of reporting right now. And I always tell all the young folks to study all the ramifications. There's not just one network, there's many. And you can even listen to, like we did, an international news agency to find out the truth. And if you listen to one and you believe a propaganda that is false, then your issue is wrong.
Yeah.
And especially socialism, it's not free. People think, oh, redistribution of funds is going to be free. No, somebody's going to pay for it. And usually you pay for it by your freedom. So I always tell the students, I always remember, freedom is not free. You have to earn it.
Yeah.
So
Were
by that, they have to study and make sure it's correct.
were your parents were they outliers in the sense that they were seeking news outside, that they were listening to what was it, Radio Free Europe,
Radio Free Europe, yes.
as opposed to listening to the state-run media? Were there other people doing that? I mean, you guys,
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of people that were doing that, and basically they know. For example, the 5-year plans would have this glorious opportunity for workers and to to have a situation where their families would strive and prosper, and it always turned out to be the other direction. It's not, uh, prosper. It's always a decline in their families' living. So, yeah, then they would switch to outside Radio Free Europe and listen to some of the different things that were reported. And so, yeah, unfortunately, when you use propaganda, you lose viewers. So that's kind of ironically, it's happened here too in the U.S. So people are, in my opinion, people are not stupid. They can figure out when something is wrong, and even if they hear it to be correct, um, actions speak louder than words. So if you see something that you witnessed on a broadcast, and then they say no, that wasn't real, then there's something wrong there.
Yeah. Now, are you pointing to conventional media outlets when you say that?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
conventional ones. Yeah.
I also, I don't consume any of those. It's, and I think most people are aware of the biases from on both sides with the different outlets, but I think that's part of the beauty of the just wealth of information that we do have access to. But that is also where it concerns me with these different massive corporations being kind of guided behind the scenes by the government, like we've seen, and the potential that sets moving forward outside of weaponizing the legal system against your political opponents. It's but should probably get back on track so to where you set us up at you'd mentioned you guys your family had
Seven helpers. But let me finish off. Also reporting on Cardinal Santi. Now the AVH was following him, and he went on the St. Mary's pilgrimage, and basically his whole premise behind the St. Mary's pilgrimage was bring faith back to the impoverished people. So that was his purpose. And actually, my grandmother went to one of them, his presentations and sermons in Minsen, Hungary. And he noticed, he reminded everyone, and see, the thing about it is on these pilgrimages, he would have thousands of people that would come. So he couldn't hold those in a church. He had to hold it outside. So they had basically battery operated uh, microphones and so on and so forth, because the communists would try to cut the lines and prevent him from talking. So he was prepared for that, and he reminded all the people in attendance that someone had walked before him, before us, and he was spat on, whipped, and nailed to a cross. And he said that he is with you now. He's walking with you now under the suppression. And he noticed the Russian soldiers on the perimeter along with the AVH police. And he said, figuratively speaking, he told them that as long as his countrymen are held prisoner within the borders of Hungary, the church bells will not ring until his brothers and sisters are free. For us, it was true. We crossed into Austria through the forest of Schopron-Perestag into Austria, and the village church was ringing 12 bells. That's where I got the title 12 bells.
it just gave me the chills. Oh, and I'm assuming he was murdered for what he was spreading.
No, actually, his story is quite amazing. Uh, he was imprisoned, so he went through the AVH Andrassy Street prison, and then was assigned to another. It was like a plantation, but it was a prison anyway. But at least it wasn't as a brick floor and sidewalls and a roof of brick, or of cement. I mean, so he was imprisoned, and in the revolution, 56 revolution, Hungary had 1 week of freedom. So he was freed by the Hungarian resistance, if you will. And then 1 week later, when the Russians rolled in, there's an interesting sidebar on that as well. Joseph Stalin died in 1953. So Khrushchev was the one that took over and followed the same guidelines that Stalin had, and still had the information going through Andropov into Rakoshy and so on. So he basically, was freed for that 1 week, and then when they started to roll in, the 300 tanks started to roll in. He found asylum in the U.S. Embassy. So in the U.S. Embassy, he was there for about 10 years. And then they negotiated him to be able to leave the embassy, and he settled into Austria. So it's an interesting story. But they patrolled the U.S. Embassy, and they were just waiting. If he should ever walk outside, he would have been arrested immediately. So,
Dear God.
That's the life under communism. Remember, under communism, there is no equal rights, individual rights, none, zero. Everybody works for the Communist Party. And going to the 7 people that helped us, if you witness another Hungarian trying to escape and you didn't stop him, you could be executed. So that was their danger. If we were caught and an investigation brought back that they had helped, they would have been executed as well. So it's a very a dramatic situation that occurred. But we had for example, we had the conductor wanted to help us. He was checking every railroad station, because we boarded the railroad in southern Hungary, and it went through think of it as a semicircle, going just past Yugoslavia up to Austria. Now, Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore, but Bosnia and all those countries that used to be called Yugoslavia are there now. So at every station, he would get off, and he had a signal. If he should take his hat off and rub the rim, like if there's sweat on it, then my parents and my 2 brothers and myself and my cousin Etta, she was 14, and my brothers were 9, 7, and I was 5. Then we would get off the train, and that was his signal. So every station, my parents were riveted to look out the window and see if what he was going to do, and he didn't take his hat off. So we got to the very last stop, which was Sopron, and turned out that he took his hat off, and that's where we got off. And then in the meantime, we had an elderly lady who was going to go visit her daughter and her daughter's husband at Mindsend. Now, in Mindsend, it was a big train station. So the secret police were there to interrogate travelers for the purpose of catching anyone that was trying to leave the country. So that particular help there, she brought us to their farm. So we weren't in the station to be, my parents were not in the station to be interrogated. So we passed, and it was an overnight stop. So the next day we got back onto the train and kept on going. So that's just an example of, how dramatic and the situation was such that if we were caught, then, I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Yeah.
Basically.
Well, will you continue telling that story of how you guys escaped?
Yeah, and basically from there, a farmer. If you think of the satellite station that was there, we got off the train, and my mom took us boys and my cousin to the gate. They had a big gate that was, across the tracks to prevent anybody from crossing. And there was a hay cart. A farmer had a hay cart and had a bull pulling the cart. And so he had asked my mom, "Do you guys need a ride?" And she said, "Sure." So my dad was giving all the Hungarian money to the conductor for his help, because outside the country, the 40th didn't mean anything. So we basically left with no money, but we had charities that helped us out. Anyway, so then as they're rolling down the dirt road, my father catches up and talks to the farmer, and the farmer said, he had asked where you're taking us, and he says, "Well, I'm taking you to the border. My farm is adjacent to the border." And my dad was saying, "Well, we want to escape at nighttime." He said, "No, you don't." He said, "The Russians patrol the border at night, and they shoot flares in the air, and anything that moves, they machine gun down." He says, "You want to escape during the day because the Hungarian soldiers are actually watching the borders during the daylight hours. And some are compassionate. So your chances are better during the daytime." So he takes us to the farm, and as we're rolling down, just envision corn stalks 9 feet tall. Okay. So the farmer had heard some engine noises, and we were at the turn going to his farm. So he immediately made that left turn, and sure enough, you had a Russian Jeep that went by behind us. So that's how close it was for us to get caught. And then we got to his farm, and as we're getting ready to, go into the forest, of course, we didn't know the direction or anything. 2 soldiers come over the hill toward us, and that caused a dramatic moment and fear in my parents and my brothers and myself. So the farmer said, "I know these 2 people, because they patrol there all the time, and he's met them and talked to them." He says, I'll talk to them." So they were asking if any of us were political. My parents were political people, and no, they're not. They're just a family trying to refugee out. And so they talked it over amongst themselves, and they decided, yeah, we'll help them. We're going to draw a map. You follow the map all the way through the forest, and he says, you're going to run into a minefield. He says that minefield has been, we removed mines out of the field, but there could be 1 or 2 still left. So you have to be careful. So he said that what you want to do is the dad lead the way, short steps, and everybody step in his steps through the minefield. So that's what our plan was. And as we entered the forest, there's like a 10-degree drop because it's all shade and no sun. And this was like almost 10 a.m. when we entered there. And we were, some of the students at UMSL and other book signings. I did the Cardinal Senti book signing at St. Mary's of Victory's Church in St. Louis. And the questions were, well, okay, how did the kids react, meaning myself and my 2 older brothers, to this timeline? I mean, 2 hours of walking in the woods, you think they'd make a noise or scream or cry or something. But dating back to listening to Radio Free Europe, we would listen with our parents. So we knew the dangers of making any sound.
Even as a 5-year-old.
Yeah. So we were even focused on not stepping onto leaves. We tried to tiptoe through, and that's how focused we were. And we were so quiet, and this part is a little humorous. We were so quiet, we snuck up on a deer.
But
We heard some rustling, so we hid behind some bushes. And sure enough, this deer comes prancing right by us. We're watching him as he walked by. So, but we had to be diligent with at each crossing. There would be like a Jeep crossing road. You'd have to look down both sides to make sure there's no Russian patrols coming or Hungarian patrols coming, and then cross that path quickly and keep on going. So we were very focused on that as well.
on the
And that,
fear also of like it being broad daylight, which is so you nothing about you feels invisible when you're moving around in the daylight and you know these people are out there hunting you.
right. So we got to the minefield, and that's what we did. We basically followed um, the footsteps of my father, and we got to the wire fence. And so we figured the wired fence was the border. So my father had this big stick that he was carrying the luggage on his shoulder, and he pushed that down and lifted up the wire, making an opening. And we all went through the opening and got to the other side. And the weeds were real tall. I was a short little guy, and I had to do a swimming motion to get through the weeds. And I actually fell on a Hungarian who was trying to escape, but was sniped and was shot in the head. And so I saw him and all the blood around him. And my mom was afraid I was going to yell out or cry or scream. So she grabbed me real quick and comforted me and saying everything's okay. And so, yeah. And uh, after we were here in the States, anytime I would see a cut or blood, I I did scream out. I thought I was dying
That
because
back.
they brought it back. Yeah. So
Jeez.
I had that TDS syndrome for a while there.
Do you remember? I mean, that obviously horrible. You've seen someone who died very gruesomely and you're 5 years old. That's horrible for anyone to see. But did that register even in, you're a small child? Did that register that, like, okay, I'm in the same, he got shot right here. Like this guy, whoever shot him is probably still out here.
Well, that was actually true, what you just said. So from there, we were continuing into Austria. The village church was ringing 12, and my mom had witnessed some field workers, and so they were all waving and and giving this downward motion and all sorts of stuff, and then one of them started to run toward us, and they're about a football field away, and so my mom couldn't understand them, so she started to walk toward them, but she didn't want to get too far away in case she had to relay information. So the guy was running as fast as he could, and there's a dramatic moment there that I don't want to spoil it, so the reader can find out what happened at that point. But there was a sniper.
Oh. Well, get your 12 bells. You're a, there's the sniper that we're not going to talk about, but this is freedom,
Right.
right? You're
Yeah.
in free territory at this point.
Yeah. It's the book is on Amazon.com. 12 Bells to Freedom, the Suhayda Story is the title. And yeah, so a lot of things had to be, it's like a puzzle. You had to have all the pieces in the right place, and you had to earn your freedom. That's why I use that terminology. Always remember, freedom is not free. You have to earn it.
Yeah, I think that's important for people to hear on multiple angles. Not just that, but our which it seems like our military recruitment numbers are starting to go back up, but that's in terms of lending people the value of service in that capacity, whether it be that or being, being a police officer or anything else or something as just gritty as this. Have you gotten to go back since as an adult?
Well, some interesting things happened. The fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, October, I believe, in 1989, was such that my parents retired back to Hungary. So they never thought in a million years that their homeland under communism would become a free country. But that's what happened. So they retired back to Hungary. Just outside of Pécs, where I was born, there's a village called Hosszúhetén. So they retired back to Hosszúhetén. And a lot of people, when I do my book signings, ask, well, what have you guys done with your lives? Okay, this is kind of after the escape. So we, as kids, you always want to fit in. Okay, that's the main focus. So we were strangers. We didn't know the language. So obviously, kids can be cruel and they can tease you and whatnot. So we always wanted to find a way to gain respect and be accepted. So we became very, very good sports people. Our sports were soccer and wrestling. So when we were sponsored up in Camp Kilmer, up in the Army base, Camp Kilmer out of New York, by the Rotary Club in Upper Michigan called Ishpeming, Michigan. So we stayed there for 2 months, and then my father found a position in Aurora, Illinois at Austin Western, which was a heavy duty, very much like Clark Equipment out of Texas. As a matter of fact, Clark Equipment bought Austin Western, um, I want to say about 20 years ago. And so we settled in Aurora, Illinois, and we joined this Aurora Kickers Soccer Club as kids. Of course, they didn't have the programs in place, so we had to practice with the grown-ups. But we learned the game very quickly. And so when they did have our age leagues in the Chicago leagues, we excelled. We did very, very well. And so a lot of the friends rallied around us as good athletes. And then during the off season, we went into wrestling, and uh, we did well. We went to sectionals and stayed. And in my case, I was the only one from Aurora College, now called Aurora University, to have gone to the nationals in wrestling. I had won.
Jeez, you were serious business. Wow.
I won my conference district championship, and it's a formulation of points. In all these different tournaments, you have to have a certain amount of championships and runners up, and you get points for all that. So that's how they determined who makes nationals and who doesn't. So that was done, and I had an interesting conversation with the athletic director, who called me, and he says, "I have good news and bad news for you." And I said, "Okay, what's the good news?" He says, "You made the NEIA national tournament in Iowa." I said, "I did." And he said, "Here's the bad news. The school can't afford to send you." So I found that to be kind of fun.
Yeah,
But I couldn't do any fundraising because I was notified a week before the tournament was going to be. So I didn't have enough time. But
so you didn't
since
actually
then,
compete.
yeah, since then, my brother Joseph, was a account manager. So he got to be, went through schooling, NIU graduate, did very well in business. My brother Bela was a school teacher. He ended up being a school teacher and soccer coach. And same for me. I worked for. When I was the first one to represent the family in the Navy, U.S. Navy. So the process of my soccer program carried on because um, the Navy sent me to the 1976 Olympic trials, where it was held in Catonville, Maryland, and I made it to the third round, which was, I think, pretty good when you had 200 and how many 76 athletes trying out for
Yeah.
spot of
What'd you do in
25.
what'd you do in the Navy?
I in the Navy, I was basically working for supply support, and we would go on these. They call them caracols, takeoff and landing, and also jet target shooting. So we would either go to Pensacola, Florida for the carrier takeoff and landing, or we would also follow the squadrons. And these are NAS Meridian, Mississippi was a station where the student pilots, jet pilots, would learn the craft of flying, but they had to learn all the parameters around it, like takeoff and landing, target shooting, which was in Yuma, Arizona, El Centro, California. So basically, the uh, supply would also detach with them because in case they needed parts for the aircraft, we had to be there to be able to get those aircraft up and running. So we did.
Yeah.
I was, yeah.
Nice. I'm a Marine, so that's why I was just asking. I was curious if you got stuck on ship or I don't understand how like uh half of my second deployment was on ship, and that is like I don't understand how sailors can do it, man. It is ship time is hell. So thankfully you got to skip doing that. But that's how long were you in?
I was in for 4 years,
Okay.
and then 2 years reserve. But then afterwards, I had an opportunity to work for McDonnell Douglas out here in St. Louis. I actually met my wife to be in the Navy, and we got married after we both were released, honorably discharged, and got married. So we settled. I settled here in St. Louis because that's where she was from, and so I got a position at McDonnell Douglas and worked there for, gosh, till 1990. And then they had that huge downturn in 1990, and many people were laid off. So I ended up, I had a double major. So I ended up going into the chemical industry. So I worked for a distributor here in St. Louis. And then basically from there, worked for them for quite a while, 11 years. And then basically went to, after 911, there's also that across the country downturn in business. So I started my own distribution company called Laszlo Corporation. And we're involved with importing wines to start with, and I created something quite unique: wine slushies. I registered it with the Treasury Department, and people love it. So we still do that today. But I'm also on to special projects, and we're about to release a new green technology product that is USDA approved, and it's called Komodo K500C. And in a 16-ounce spray can, you have Komodo 911, and basically it's safe for any human, animal, or the environment type process. It'll coat an asset and it won't burn, and you can spray it onto a flame and suppress it and put it out immediately. So
Wow.
I have a website on that, and your audience can go to it and protect their homes and or their assets that they believe may need protection. And that's www.laslokomodo.com. And there's a lot of videos. We worked on a couple of prescribed burns, Giant City, Illinois, and Osage Nation in Oklahoma, 800 acres there, and Giant City was 450 acres. So we did perimeter, culvert. We had compound protection. We had office building protection, perimeters there. So when you do that prescribed burn, you light it, that fire just goes. And if you have it contained, that's the magic behind even wildfires. If you contain the fire, you're going to protect communities. So
Well,
that's what Komodo does.
Is that they're going, if this scales, will there be an application? Because a lot of these fire retardants that they drop from the skies are, I know this was one of the things kind of hamstringing back in California during the Palisade fires, was that a lot of those retardants are very toxic. Is this something that you expect to be used on that scale one day?
It's green. It's safe.
I know.
It's no danger. Yeah, and we've presented it to Cal Fire, and I've also presented to Governor Newsom and to Mayor Bass, and no reply. Mayor Bass I take that back. Mayor Bass sent me an opportunity to donate to California, but she missed the whole point of the product that is USDA approved and works like a charm. And on my website, which if some of your viewers go to it, they'll see a piece of equipment called the MX1. Now, the MX1 looks like a cannon, and it'll shoot out formula a football field away. So it sits on a trailer, and it's remote controlled, and it rotates 360 degrees. So they could have been using the streets of Pacific Palisades and spraying homes, trees, common ground, and created a football field of protection around the community to save the community from burning.
But yeah, I don't think they wanted to.
Didn't pick it up.
Honest, I don't.
Well, here's what Cal Fire said they wanted to do. No, first of all, you have to have USDA approval. Well, we got USDA approval. Okay, it's green technology. California's a green state. There you go, 2 for 2. But then the third item was, is it airdropped? Approved for airdrop? Not yet. It's going to be second quarter of this year, 26, where it's going to be tested for it. So they said, now we're strictly focused on airdrop. Okay, so airdrop under Pacific Palisades was waived off. Why? Because of conditions. If they would have had a proactive fire solution of air and ground with the MX1, they could have protected Pacific Palisades.
Yeah, I really don't think they wanted to. Just like in Hawaii, I think that we've seen these moves for them to take over that land. Like
I've heard that.
They're shady. There's, at least optics wise, it seems to be some shady dealings going on. And that's, yeah, I'm not just throwing this stuff out there. These are moves that have been at least attempted. I don't know where they stand today, but I think that's so. I was aware of the wine slushies. I wasn't aware of this. So this is that's super cool, man. It's just.
Well, we've also submitted to GSA. So now the military, when we are also working on a special acquisition report called SAR for the military. So chances are it's going to be used on board ship. It's going to be used in hangars in the military, because right now they use PFOS and PFAS foam in the military, and that's been outlawed in civilian industry, but they still use it. And unfortunately, it kills people that don't vacate the hangar in time, because they have an alarm, and then 5 minutes they have to be clear, and that's when the foam starts to be deployed. Mm-hmm. And there have been situations where if someone's in a C-130 and they can't get out in time, and then that foam comes down, it kills people. So yeah, that's the way it works.
As we start to bring this thing home, I'm curious to hear what your experience with all that has been, specifically in regards to trying to become a subcontractor to get that contract in the military. How, this is it's,
Well, we just to give you an idea, we're in our seventh year of Komodo
Mhm.
presenting it. We're presenting it to states. We're presenting it to homes. We're presenting it to uh, you name it. People that do prescribed burns, military, the GSA. We've tried once before, but we didn't get everything in properly, so we had to redo it. So we just finished it up December 30th of this year, last year. And so now we're anticipating a good communication for that. And I think Komodo is going to be a benefit in a number of things, even wartime situations and or fire containment control, protecting assets, especially hangars. The hangars, there would be no need for an alarm or for a 5 minute delay. I mean, as soon as the sensors detect fire, it could deploy those MX1s immediately. And it doesn't matter if it sprays on people, it's not going to harm them. It's green.
uh, yeah. When you say it's been 7 years, have you been trying to get that contract for 7 years?
Yeah, we've been working on
Wow.
marketing and all that for this long a period of time. But in the meantime, you have other products that sustain the company. So that's what I had to juggle and refer that to. And we went through a pretty tough uh, 2020 to 2024 over COVID. So yeah, we're trying to rebound on that too. So it's been a tough road, but we're so far, Hungarians don't give up.
Yeah.
We
Let
always
me
we always go forward.
let me try and direct this question a little bit better because I don't think I've communicated it very clearly. So, and this is where I'm coming from. I'm a software developer. I've been researching, trying to get some software that I'm building into the American education system and just looking at different contracts and how they work. In the way that there are prime contractors and people who want to get a foot in the door with some of these contracts needing to basically be taken under the umbrella of one of these prime contractors and getting them, then where they are getting a share of what's going on. That is what, because I understand the marketing and all of that has been a process for 7 years, but how convoluted has that specific process of trying to, get a prime contractor to take you on as a subcontractor and all of that how bad has that been?
Well, we presented to other large businesses. Now, in my case, as I reported, I was a veteran of the U.S. Navy. So now my company, Laszlo Corporation, is a veteran-owned small business.
Mhm.
So having that title VOSB and registered as SBA, veteran-owned small business, it gives me opportunities. But you don't have the opportunities until you finish your GSA registration, and that's pretty tricky. It's not an easy process. You have to have an array of questions and answers, and you have to have a couple of examples on who you've sold it to and what they used it for and what the result was and all that. And then you have a whole army of uploads that you have to present, financials, you name it. So it's pretty involved. So once you have that, though, then you're registered, and your chances of being a subcontract company is much better. In our case, though, the product we have is unique. It's above and beyond anything on the market today. So it's a class by itself. So we think it's going to be contracts will be awarded directly to a small veteran-owned small business instead of
Yeah.
going through a big company and then coming to us. I don't think that route's going to work.
Yeah, that would be freaking incredible, man. It just obviously life changing for you, but just to see again the continuing progression upwards after having started in such a shithole underneath the Soviet, fist. Like it's so cool that you've done all this and that you've been able to throw this all down into a book so that it will last, as long as people have it in their libraries. So I just
Well, my parents never allowed us to forget where we came from. So we always wanted to be the best that we could be, which is your term for the Marines, be the best that you can be. But in our case, we carry it past military and into civilian life and company life and try to benefit others from what you have. And I really believe Komodo is going to save lives. It'll save equipment. The spray can, for example, 16-ounce Komodo 911 is class A, B, C, D, and K certified. So it will even put out a lithium ion battery fire.
wow. That's I'm so curious to know. I like knowing how things work. I'm so curious to hear what the process of developing all of that was. But I think let me check the time here. Yeah, I think we probably need to start bringing this thing to a wrap. But I just yeah, and as we do, I wanted to make sure I gave this some time to, and I know you kind of have already at various parts during this conversation, but remind people, or if you have other takeaways. We've already talked about the slipping of control. We've talked about different controlling of media and turning citizens against each other through these secret police forces. But there's socialism is very much still alive around the world, and it is also, we've seen it. It has now been essentially voted into New York. Um, what is there anything else, kind of abstracting lessons from all of this that you would like to remind people for their kind of final food for thought, bringing this thing home?
Well, I do want to report to all those folks that support socialism and communism. Uh, Getting stuff free is a propaganda tool, but it's not real. Someone pays for it. And by recruiting through getting free stuff, the victims are the ones that vote for this process because they will be the ones that are victims of losing your home. They confiscate it, and then you pay rent on the home that you've already owned. There's so many different things that need to be studied before you cast your vote. And unfortunately, there's been too many people that believed in a propaganda statement, which, as I understand it, Mamdani has already backed off of certain things. And it happens to be the very things that he was elected for. So you're getting a glimpse of things to come. So I always say this: be careful what you wish for,
Yeah.
because it could turn out to be the wrong way.
Well, and even, we're recording this right now in January. This will come out in March, but like Venezuela is a hot topic right now, is, I mean, understandably, given recent events. But, I started looking into that, and that was a bustling economy and bustling society until the 90s when Chavez was voted into power. Like it
Well,
is.
there's been some misconceptions on the Venezuela situation. Now,
Okay.
before Chavez, well, yeah, before Chavez and the new guy meant is it Mendora? I forget. But anyway, way
Maduro.
back when Maduro, there we go. Way back when the oil industry in Venezuela was run by ExxonMobil, Sunoco, Phillips, and Chevron. Now, when Chavez came into office, they confiscated all of that. So billions of dollars were lost by the oil companies of the USA and basically taken over by the fascist, or what do you, I don't know, communists, I guess, Communist Party in Venezuela, which fueled Russia, China, Iran, and there's one other one, Cuba. As a matter of fact, the Cubans traded security for oil. Now that President Trump had this strategic surgical removal of the leader there, and all the oil companies are going to go back and get their plants back. They're going to shut off all the oil to China, Russia, Iran, Cuba. And then you're going to see some governments toppling because in the case of Russia, for example, they were using Russian oil sales to fuel the Ukrainian situation. So that, and Cuba is already in dire straits with their economy. So you're liable to see some communist countries fall because of this one situation that President Trump did. And I'll tell you, the Venezuelan people are celebrating. So they know what it's like to live under that, like I do, and they're celebrating for a reason. They're free.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something like in the last, I think it's in the last decade, almost nine. No, it's almost eight. I think it's, no, it's either 8.9 or 7.9 million Venezuelans have become refugees and fleeing that country in the last decade or two. It's just, and it is, and like you talked on with the trading of security with Cuba, like they were also, when Chavez came to power, and this has continued since him, obviously through Maduro, but like they were giving oil, just giving it to Iran, Russia, and China. Like because it is, they are, they're subsidizing each other essentially is all is going on there. But it was, it's, I feel like we are always living in a wild time, but this just, I feel like adding into what's already going on, like you touched on with Russia and Ukraine and the other things in the Middle East that are all proxy wars. This is just going to add another match into the fire. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see if there is some toppling, like you said, which again then opens another problem as there's a vacuum that needs to be filled. But um, very
Well, I personally think Cuba is going to fall first.
just because of where there's
Yeah.
an economically already.
Oh, they're already in dire straits economically, and now to cut off oil, they're going to be in dire straits. So they could be a country that also will be celebrating when the Communist Party falls there as well, and people are free again. So it's not the people. The people, just like in Hungary, the people want to be free. They want to be able to live a loving life with their families, and know that everyone is, even their neighbors, are protected. But again, when you don't have individual rights, I had one person ask me, well, under socialism, you get this and this and this free education. Yeah, but somebody's paying for that, right? Now, I'll ask you a question. How many communist parties have charities? They don't. Capitalism has charities. Churches have charities. But communism? Nope. One party rules everybody. So it's something for young folks to understand that wishing for something like that is not going to make their lives better.
Yeah, I think it's in the messaging, and also probably the messaging being channeled through the institutions that they're coming up in, specifically, our institutions of higher education, however, seem to have been ideologically compromised. And Yuri Bezmenov years and years ago came out saying that this is what at the time Russia was doing. And, I know we do in other places, but there's, it's not like we have clean hands on that. All of these, there's a lot of screwy business that goes on in terms of subverting other governments on all through all superpowers. But I think that's probably where that comes from, and hopefully some of this stuff starts to highlight that, and that also the people in these countries, that if these regimes do topple, that, like you said, the innocent people are not hit too hard by it, that it doesn't cause anarchy for a time that costs people their lives and their livelihoods and everything else. But I'm glad you were able to share all of that, and I felt like that was very important and kind of a core of whether you meant to intentionally or not, what you are doing with 12 Bells to Freedom. So I just appreciate you doing it.
One more quick point. The Potsdam Agreement was for reconstruction of all the devastated countries. It wasn't a license to steal like Russia did with all the Eastern Bloc European countries.
And
so that's something to think about.
Yeah. I do suspect do you suspect that's the kind of the groundwork that is being laid in the Gaza Strip, and that will be laid in Ukraine whenever this war comes to an end?
Well, see, Ukraine had an advantage over Hungary. Hungary did not have any Western help. Zero, none. Even though there's a radio broadcaster in Hungary during the invasion attack. 300 tanks rolled into Budapest, and he was pleading for Western help all the way until he was shot on air.
Gosh.
So Ukraine has had many amounts of money. They have had equipment, missiles,
Troops.
Troops from various UN nations that came in and helped them. So, yeah, it's a situation that it's devastating for Ukrainians, and I feel for them because they're kind of going through what Hungary went through, but at least they're getting some support.
Mm-hmm.
And with that support, they're going to celebrate just like Venezuela. If they win and they're free, they're going to celebrate. So we'll see how it goes, but I really think the Venezuelan situation is the key. And if Russia can't get this oil from Venezuela, that could hamper their process in Ukraine, very much so.
I mean, hopefully it brings the war to an end, but I don't know. I hadn't thought of that, even though I was aware of that dynamic that was going on with the oil from Venezuela. But I very, very curious to see if that is what happens now. And I think I'll probably end up. I know I said I'll release this in March. I think I'm just gonna do it early on an unscheduled day because I didn't know how much we'd get into all of this, but I'm glad we did. Again, it's someone else harping on it who doesn't come from a place that is, a direct parallel to those kinds of situations is a lot more impactful than anyone else talking about it. And I think it's a message that needs to be heard.
When you walk the walk, you can talk the talk.
Always. Unfortunately, too many people talk without walking the walk. So I told you before we started recording, I've been just stupidly excited for our conversation. So I thank you again. Where I know the book's on Amazon, kind of available everywhere. And then you have LaszloKomodo.com. What else?
You can also buy it. You also buy it at Barnes and Noble. So I'm going to be doing a couple of book signings at Barnes and Noble. but with Barnes and Noble, you have to order it just like you do through Amazon.com. But yeah, people are giving me some very nice thank yous for the story, 5 stars. So I appreciate the feedback. And I think young people, if they read the book, they'll get an understanding of directions to maintain freedom.
Awesome, man. Well, appreciate you for doing it. I'm sure a lot of this stuff can't be easy to talk about. So and probably, never mind. I'm going to leave that there. Just thank you for doing it. And thank you
You're
for coming
welcome.
on.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate
Yeah.
it, Zach.
And thanks everyone at home for listening to another episode of Going In Blind. Like last week, I'm going to let this one be and let you have your own takeaways from it. Listen to it again, share it around. This is whether you agree with what was said or not. I think a second listen would probably change that a little bit if you really go back and try and listen with open ears. So please do that. Please share that around with a curious mind who needs to hear it. And then come back next week, or maybe if this gets released a little early, just come back to listen to the next episode as well. I'll see you then. Bye.